What's good, fam? Today we're doing a reaction to Dr. Mike, a medical look into what killed every president. What's good, fam? Teacher Eddie here with a very interesting proposition. This one was requested by Eduardo. Eduardo asked me to react to Dr. Mike. I love Dr. Mike. I've been watching him for a long time. This is my first time reacting to him. If you're not subscribed to Dr. Mike, definitely check him out. Let's find out how every single president was killed.
There have been 45 presidents in the history of the United States, and as of uploading this video, 39 of them have died. Today I'm talking about what killed every president and the bizarre circumstances that surrounded many of their deaths. 4 assassinations, a top secret surgery aboard a fishing boat, God bless America, and pee-whoop. George Washington was killed by his doctors. That's what I think anyway.
Pretty much.
In 1799, then retired President Washington developed a sore throat. His condition worsened over the next few days, despite the efforts of several physicians. Of course, in 1799, medical treatment was very poor, as doctors often believed the best way to treat ailments was by balancing the humors, meaning they would balance the amount of blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile within the body.
That makes no sense!
Over the course of several days, doctors drained Washington of 32 ounces of his blood, gave him blisters in his throat, forced him to vomit, and filled him with enemas. No surprise, Washington passed after several days of this medieval torture. I do wonder if Washington would have lived longer had he just hydrated well and maybe got a Z-Pack. John Adams lived until 90.
Yeah, Washington, he got a case of pneumonia, and pretty much that was a death sentence at that point. He was actually visiting. He was done with politics after he said that after 2 terms he was done setting the precedent that presidents would serve 2 terms until, of course, FDR. And on his way back to Mount Vernon, it was snowy, it was cold, and his doctors definitely with the bloodletting and all that stuff. But again, medical ideology, I don't think it's gotten much better.
90 years old, the longest living president until Ronald Reagan, when he died of heart failure likely related to arterial sclerosis, a blockage of your arteries due to plaque buildup, usually occurring with old age or poor lifestyle habits. Strangely enough, Adams died on July 4th, 1826.
Yes, same day as Thomas Jefferson.
50 years to the day he signed the Declaration of Independence, and just 5 hours after Thomas Jefferson, who died the same exact day.
Yup.
The cause of his death is not conclusive, but it was likely due to a variety of ailments such as diarrhea, kidney damage, and an enlarged
Diarrhea can kill you, people. You got to be very careful with diarrhea. Prolonged diarrhea can dehydrate you and can lead to death. You got to be careful with that stuff. But yeah, when Thomas Jefferson died, he thought that Adams had outlived him. And Thomas Jefferson's last words were actually, "Adams lives."
possibly cancerous prostate. America's shortest president at just 5'4", James Madison lived until the age of 85 when he died of congestive heart failure, where the heart's ability to pump blood deteriorates, causing fluid buildup throughout the body. While specific details are not well recorded, James Monroe died in 1831 after a battle with tuberculosis, a bacterial infection that usually attacks the lungs. And while he may have been only America's 5th president, at the time of his death, he joined Adams and Jefferson to become the 3rd president to die on July 4th. The fact of former presidents dying on July 4th was not lost on the American people, with the trend becoming a bit of a mid-1800s meme. John Quincy Adams served 1 term as president and then became the first
and was the first son of a president, because a lot of people and a lot of my students think that George Bush and George Bush Jr. are the only father and son, but no, the first one was John Adams and then John Quincy Adams.
First to die in office, though not in office as president. You see, after losing the election of 1829, John Quincy Adams continued his public service by holding Congress for 9 terms. At the age of 78, during a contentious debate over the Mexican-American War on the floor of the House of Representatives, Adams collapsed, suffering a significant stroke, where there's decreased circulation to the brain leading to neurological damage. He died at his home 2 days later, but not before what must have been a spectacular emergency on Capitol Hill. Andrew Jackson suffered suffered a long and slow decline in health before dying at the age of 78. The cause of his death, though, has been widely disputed, some attributing it to the use of the medication calomel, leading to heavy metal poisoning. But JAMA states he probably died of kidney failure with full body swelling known at the time as dropsy. While it's not entirely certain what killed Martin,
it's amazing that Andrew Jackson lived as long as he did, with the amount of duels he was involved in and the overall craziness that was Andrew Jackson. Just absolute insanity, that man's life.
Van Buren. Many sources, including his obituary in the New York Times, cite issues originating within his chest. It's likely his decline began with a lung infection, leading to cardiopulmonary failure. Now, things get interesting. William Henry Harrison delivered a 2-hour inaugural address in freezing drizzle without a coat or gloves, which many people believe to be the cause of pneumonia, an infection of the lungs, which killed him only 1 month into serving office. In 1841, germs had not been discovered. Germs everywhere! Rather, doctors believed the most effective medical treatments were to, just like with Washington, balance the humors. Doctors blistered the president and made him drink substances that forced him to vomit and have diarrhea. Of course, none of those methods actually worked.
Diarrhea, people.
Goop. And so, William Henry Harrison remains our president with the shortest stint in office. John Tyler took over for William Henry Harrison and served the remainder of that term as president. Historians claim he was never very healthy to begin with and died in 1862 of a stroke. He remains the only president in US history not to be buried with the Stars and Stripes, as he was the darling of the Confederacy and was buried with their flag instead. James K. Polk had grand visions of his life after
that's fascinating. I did not know that.
The presidency, leaving Washington on a southern tour of the US, eventually hoping to end in Nashville, where he had purchased a large home. Unfortunately, Polk died 3 months after leaving office. The shortest post-presidency stint in American history from cholera, a diarrheal disease caused by drinking contaminated water.
People, diarrhea, I'm telling you, diarrhea kills. It's killed 4 presidents so far. That's as many as have been assassinated.
Zachary Taylor served a year in office before dying under what many would say are suspicious circumstances. To this day, many claim he was poisoned by pro-slavery Southerners. The cause of his death was so controversial that in 1991, his descendants actually agreed to have his remains exhumed for testing, which did not find a high enough volume of arsenic inside his remains to suggest a definitive poisoning. A more common theory is he contracted cholera or dysentery after celebrating the 4th of July in Washington, D.C., which at the time had primitive sewers, often resulting in food and water contamination. Millard Fillmore's rumored
diarrhea strikes again
to have been the White House's first health-conscious president, avoiding alcohol and tobacco. He did die from a stroke at the age of 74. Franklin Pierce died at the age of 69 from cirrhosis of the liver, likely due to a lifetime of heavy drinking. Alcohol abuse damages the liver directly, as ethanol is a toxin, which leads to inflammation and massive swelling within the gut. James Buchanan is
the other interesting thing about Pierce is he lived a very troubled life. I did a video which was one interesting fact about every president, and I talked about it. But he's also was voted as hottest president ever. President Hottie, McSteamy.
Is considered by many to be the worst president in the history of the United States, as he did nothing to preserve the Union before handing a country divided by slavery to Abraham Lincoln.
You are useless.
Information on his death is far and few between, with most reports claiming he died at the age of 77 from pneumonia. Abraham Lincoln, gun. Next. Just kidding. Though the death of Abraham Lincoln is probably the most well-known on this list, it's not without its intrigue. Just 5 days after the Union victory of the Civil War, famous actor and Confederate sympathizer John Wilkes Booth.
Bro, a lot of people don't know how famous John Wilkes Booth actually was as an actor. A lot of people think he was just this disgruntled wannabe, you know, state. Imagine the correlation would be like if Tom Cruise killed the president. Like, that's how famous he was. I say Tom Cruise because it's kind of believable that Tom Cruise would.
Booth snuck into Lincoln's box at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. and fired a...
All right, isolate that clip. Wilkes snuck into Lincoln's box.
.44 caliber
Yes, I'm a
single-shot
child.
Derringer pistol directly into the back of Lincoln's head from just inches away. Lincoln immediately fell into a coma and died across the street 7 hours later. This,
Yes.
we know. But here are the juicy details that are often looked over. Heavily detailed notes on Lincoln's final hours and his following autopsy were taken by the president's personal physician, Dr. Robert Stone, which is how we know that Dr. Stone did nothing to help the situation by using his finger to probe the wound and search for the bullet, putting unnecessary pressure inside the president's brain at
It's a
his most
headshot.
vulnerable
What do you
time.
think was
Look,
gonna happen?
He was gonna die no matter what they did.
Exactly.
But a dirty, gloveless finger inside the brain probably didn't help. Andrew Johnson became the first president to go on and serve in the Senate after his presidency, and died of a stroke at the age of 66. Ulysses S. Grant was an avid cigar smoker, which was a likely cause of his throat cancer that killed him at the age of 63. It was this death that largely sparked Americans' fear of the disease, which we still see today. Rutherford B. Hayes died at the age of 70 of complications after a heart attack. Assassination number 2. Only 18 months into his presidency, James A. Garfield was shot on a train platform in Baltimore, Maryland, by Charles Julius Guiteau, a lawyer and author who was deeply disillusioned, believing he was instrumental to Garfield's election,
Yes.
and therefore furious when he
I did a reaction to this. You should definitely check it out because I think McKinley doesn't get discussed at all pretty much, but Garfield falls, to Kennedy and Lincoln as far as assassinations go. But it's super interesting. Guiteau was a character, but it definitely didn't help how they treated the president. Talk about sticking your dirty fingers into wounds. I went into a whole thing about how he actually died.
he was not rewarded with his own political appointment. Guiteau was executed after being found guilty of murdering Garfield, but not before he argued that he didn't kill Garfield. Rather, Garfield's doctors were to blame. While Guiteau was no doubt responsible for pulling the trigger, firing a bullet into Garfield's back. The thing is, he might be right.
What?
He's
Reports
100%
indicate that
right.
the bullet created a 3.5-inch wound in Garfield's abdomen, with the bullet finally resting in a benign location between his groin and navel. It took 3 months for the infection to kill Garfield, but not before countless doctors used their fingers and tools to open the wound to 20 inches in width in an endless search for this bullet. It wasn't just the doctors either, as famed telephone inventor Alexander Graham Bell used the world's first metal detector to provide a general location of this bullet. Countless physicians have debated the exact cause of Garfield's death.
And Alexander Graham Bell didn't know that the mattress that the president was laying on had metal springs. So his metal detector was going off like everywhere. So he was like, hey, try there, try there, try there. So he didn't help either. But I'm very impressed in the amount of research Dr. Mike or his team, I assume he has a team, does, because he's got a ton of subscribers.
Death, and we'll never be able to say for sure. But had doctors simply sewed Garfield up and allowed him to rest, he may not have died from this gunshot
100%,
wound
he
after
should have
all.
lived.
Chester A. Arthur died 2 years after leaving office from a significant cerebral hemorrhage, thought to have been caused by his hypertension or high blood pressure. Grover Cleveland died of a heart attack at the age of 71, but that's far from the most interesting event in his medical history. In the summer of 1893, at the beginning of his second term in office, he felt a lump in the roof of his mouth. His doctor diagnosed it as cancer and recommended having it removed immediately. Cleveland feared news of him having cancer would shake the stock market and disrupt the nation, so he opted for a secret surgery aboard a yacht during a 4-day fishing trip.
This is a secret.
6 surgeons numbed the president up with ether, successfully removed the tumor, 5 teeth, and a large part of his upper left jawbone in just 90 minutes, swaying back and forth in the waves of the Atlantic Ocean. Because the surgery was inside the president's mouth and his signature mustache remained intact, Cleveland hid the surgery from the public. Despite whirling rumors, smear campaigns, and discrediting journalists, the operation remained unconfirmed for 24 years before one of the doctors broke their silence and finally told the truth. Benjamin Harrison was the grandson of President William Henry Harrison, and just like Grandpa, he died of pneumonia at the age of 68. Assassination number 3. 6 months into his second term in 1901, William McKinley was shot twice in the abdomen by Leon Frank.
Yeah, that's the hardest one.
It's CZOLGOSZ.
Scholgosh.
by Leon Frank Czolgosz, making him the third U.S. president to be
Czolgosz.
assassinated in 36 years. Czolgosz lost
Yeah.
his job during the economic panic of 1893 and became a believer in anarchism, or a terrorist movement sweeping across Europe that seek to assassinate world leaders. Czolgosz approached McKinley in a crowded building at a festival in Buffalo, shook his hand, and fired 2 shots from a .32 revolver. One bullet bounced off a button and didn't harm McKinley, but the other penetrated his abdomen. McKinley was rushed to a nearby hospital where a surgeon sewed up the entry and exit wounds.
That was the problem. There were no surgeons at the hospital. All they had were nurses. And the surgeon who was on call was performing a surgery several hours away, and he refused to come and treat McKinley. He said, not even for the president, am I going to leave, he had somebody on the table. He's like, I'm not going to leave them to die, even for the president. So there were no surgeons. That was the problem.
From the bullet in the president's stomach, though the bullet was never found. Doctors were optimistic for a healthy recovery in the following days. But a week or so later, they discovered his wounds had become gangrenous, where parts of the body begin to die and cause deeper infection. It was the death of William McKinley that ignited a national discussion about protecting the president, with Congress ultimately charging the Secret Service with that exact duty in 1906. Theodore Roosevelt died in his sleep in 1919 when...
Yeah, because imagine, in 36 years, that's basically 9 presidential terms, 3 of the presidents get assassinated. That's just crazy.
A blood clot entered his lung. Future Vice President Thomas R. Marshall famously said, death had to take Roosevelt sleeping, for if he had been awake, there would have been a fight. William Howard Taft was our nation's heaviest president, at one point reaching 340 pounds, and died at the age of 72 after lingering in a coma caused by complications with high blood pressure, heart disease, and inflammation of the bladder. Time for my favorite one. While in office, Woodrow Wilson suffered a stroke in 1919 that paralyzed his left side and nearly blinded him. Out of fear that the news would shake the country, Wilson and his inner circle kept the president's health a complete secret, hiding him away where he could only be seen by his personal physician and his wife, Edith Wilson, the star of this story. While it's never been conclusively proven, it is believed that instead of serving as the intermediary between her husband, the president, and the cabinet actually running the country, Edith took it upon herself to make countless executive decisions, effectively serving as America's first female president. Where's
Absolutely
that
true.
Woodrow Wilson survived the remainder of his term and died 3 years later of further complications from his stroke. Warren G. Harding died in office at the age of 57 from what is believed to have been a myocardial infarction or a heart attack. His cause of death is not entirely conclusive because his wife refused an autopsy. Calvin Coolidge died alone in his bedroom from coronary thrombosis, or a clot in the coronary artery blocking blood flow to the heart. Herbert Hoover lived 31 years after leaving the White House amidst the Great Depression. In 1962, Hoover was diagnosed with colon cancer and had a tumor removed from his large intestine. 2 years later, his intestines ruptured, causing massive bleeding, leading to a coma and his eventual death in 1964. Franklin Delano Roosevelt holds the record for most presidential terms, having won 4 elections in a row from 1932 until his death in office. In 1944, a team of physicians performed a full assessment of FDR and found he was suffering from numerous heart issues, high blood pressure, and bronchitis, likely all of these caused by a lifetime of smoking and heavy amounts of tobacco. Despite his declining health, he ran for a 4th presidential term, privately saying he would resign once World War II was over. The stress eventually overwhelmed Roosevelt in April of 1945, resulting in a brain bleed while posing for a portrait. He collapsed and died shortly thereafter. Harry Truman was hospitalized for 22 days at the age of 88 because of heart failure, heart arrhythmia, and kidney failure. He became comatose due to sepsis, the body's life-threatening response to an infection, and died the night after Christmas in 1972. At one point, Dwight D. Eisenhower smoked 4 packs of cigarettes a day, which contributed to years of heart issues. He suffered several heart attacks and even survived numerous cardiac arrests. No surprise he died of heart failure in 1969. He did beat Hitler, though. John F. Kennedy may have had the most complex medical history out of any U.S. president. He is known to have had, or was speculated to have, the following conditions and diseases: scarlet fever, measles, whooping cough, chickenpox, severe spastic colitis or IBS, Cushing's syndrome, urinary tract infections, prostatitis, Addison's disease, malaria, adrenal insufficiency, and chronic back pain, amongst others. Despite his countless health problems, his back issues were the one that played a role in his infamous assassination in Dallas in 1968. Specifically, the back brace that he wore because of
brace,
failed
yeah.
back surgeries hidden underneath his suit. It actually prevented Kennedy from ducking after being hit with the first bullet.
100%
Who fired
true.
the bullet? Well, that's a video for a different channel. Lyndon B. Johnson was a hero of the Democratic Party for passing groundbreaking civil rights legislation in the 1960s. And he was also the hero of the Party for going hard with food, alcohol, and cigarettes. In a famous interview with Walter Cronkite, LBJ said smoking calmed him down, and it was better for his heart to smoke and be relaxed than not smoke and be nervous. An interesting hypothesis
Logic.
that probably contributed to the heart attack that killed him in his Texas ranch in 1973. Richard Nixon was 81 years old when a blood clot in his left atrium became dislodged and traveled to his brain, causing a stroke. He quickly fell into a coma and died 4 days later. Gerald Ford died in 2006 with a death certificate that cites arteriosclerotic cerebral vascular disease and diffuse arterial sclerosis, or
Yeah, you could say that, but he couldn't pronounce Sholgash.
thickening of arterial walls causing poor circulation, leading to organ damage. Ronald Reagan spent the final 10 or so years of his life in a losing battle with Alzheimer's disease, where brain cells
10 years? I'd go with a lot longer than 10.
and connections die slowly, causing loss of memory and other issues. He eventually died in 2004 from pneumonia. And finally, our most recent, George H.W. Bush, who in 2012 was diagnosed with vascular Parkinsonism, or a type of deterioration of brain tissue from blocked small blood vessels affecting motor function, necessitating the use of a mobility scooter and limiting his speech. The condition slowly worsened into his 90s, and he died on November 30th, 2018. I actually immigrated to the US at the age of 6. Here's that entire story in Draw My Life animated format. Click here to enjoy, and as always, stay happy and
Yeah, he immigrated from Russia, actually, which is where my family came from. So his name is probably Misha, not, which translates to Mike. But anyway, Dr. Mike, great job. A lot of great research went into this, especially with things like the back brace with Kennedy, which a lot of people don't know about. Really good. Learned a couple of things, some interesting facts. Very well done video, very interesting, and pretty much 99% accurate, except for like the one or two things that I pointed out. But great job, great video, loved it. Let me know in the comment sections what you think. Let me know any other videos you'd like me to react to. I've been Teacher Ready, and I'll catch you next time. Fam! And shouting out the Patreons as always, the Chancellors, Alex S. and John Alonzo, the Principals, Chad A. Clement, Francisco Mora, Ed Veras, and Laura. If you want to support Teacher Ready, please visit patreon.com/modernretroshow or visit the link in the description.